Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. As I see, we've got quite a number of you already signed in. So welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Retention Lessons for Digital Subscriptions. My name is Nick Tjaardstra. I'm the Director of Europe and Africa at WAN-IFRA, but mainly focusing on the topic of digital revenue. We've got a really good speaker for you today, Cecilia Campbell, who's author of the report that we just published, which is all about retention, of course, and she'll introduce herself very shortly. We're broadcasting to you here from beautiful downtown sunny Frankfurt on Main, and from looking at the people that registered, we've got guys joining from Switzerland, France, Israel, Brazil, Netherlands, UK, Belgium, even Philippines and Trinidad and Tobago. So welcome to everybody who's joining. There will be a recording of this session, so if you don't catch anything and you want to listen to it later, we will be uploading it to YouTube with the slides. And if you do have any questions, there is in the GoToWebinar panel a little section for putting in questions, and we can get those to Cecilia at the end, and I'll also try and answer where possible. So here's what the report looks like if you've not yet downloaded it. Engaged readers don't churn. That's what we thought summed it up. And if you've not got it yet, here's the link. So wanifra.org/reader_rev_report. And this is the point when we do a little bit of a plug for related events that we've got coming up. We've got one that's focused purely on local digital subscriptions, which is a particular challenge. That's a small workshop happening on 14th of November here in Frankfurt. We've booked ourselves back into Vienna for Digital Media Europe, 1st and 2nd of April, and we will definitely have 2 full days on digital subscriptions at that event, and retention will be a big topic, as well as advertising, actually, which we shouldn't forget. And of course, we have a program which focuses completely on digital subscriptions for a very select group in parallel. And the final plug is for someone who's actually featured in the report, Paul Nidregotten from our media, and he features in our e-learning, and we have a course which is all about paid content, and it's actually a really good way to onboard people who are just joining your organization, or people who want to get a certificate which says, look, I understand the basics of digital revenue. So do check out mma.wanifra.org. So as mentioned, we'll have those questions at the end, but you can type them in at any time as we go forward. So I'm going to hand you over now to Cecilia, and it would help if I got to the start of the presentation here. So Cecilia,
hello everybody. Yes. I'm actually broadcasting to you from sunny Malmö, where I live at the moment. So I'm a Swedish journalist, and I've been working with WAN-IFRA for 20 years now. And I've been tracking the digital subscription business for the past 10 or so. I've sat in literally hundreds of hours of meetings and workshops with publishers, and I've written as many pages of reports on this topic for our reader revenue group. And there was a pivotal time, was May 2011, when we visited the New York Times, just a couple of months after they launched their paywall. And later that year, of course, our big topic for the workshop was which paywall model should I choose? And we said it then, and we say it now, just because the New York Times does something does not mean it's necessarily a good idea for your business. And one of the big conclusions from my research for this report this year is really that there is no silver bullet. There's no one big answer for digital subscriptions. You have to work out what works for your business, in your market, with your audience. So about the report. Next. At the beginning of the year, we knew digital subscriptions was absolutely the most important topic to so many publishers. And I had just then recently read an article by industry veteran Raju Narizetti, and he was like imploring digital media journalists to move beyond reporting just what the number of subscribers that somebody had, because that number doesn't really tell you anything about their success, and certainly not in terms of revenue. We also knew that many publishers were getting really good at managing the funnel and driving sales, but retention rates in the digital subscription economy are very different from print. So it means even if you have really good sales, you don't necessarily build a sustainable subscriber base, and that means you've got low growth. So we decided to hone in on churn, which is the most expensive issue in the subscription economy. And we approached a number of publishers who we knew had worked through the conversion strategy, and they were kind of well into focusing on loyalty. Next, because this slide explains why we ended up talking to relatively many publishers in the Nordics. So some publishers here have been in the doing paid content longer, but more importantly, there are other factors such as the population is really digitally savvy. The print decline has been much faster than in most other markets, so it's kind of forced the publisher's hand. And crucially, almost all the newspapers have launched digital subscriptions now up here. And at least with the big nationals, they kind of went straight for putting all the best content behind the paywall, which forced subscribers to just come along, and they are accepting paying now for content. And even anecdotally, you know, I hear from publishers saying that when people run into the paywall on Facebook and they complain, other readers will defend the publisher, saying you can't expect to get good journalism for free. Next. Right, so let's get into the meat of this. So I want to say again that there is definitely a lot of optimism, but there is no like simple answer, no clear route forward. There are lots of fascinating and really insightful lessons learned by my interviewees, but ultimately it's about, you have to ask yourself the right questions for your situation. So let's start with the end game. The first question is though, so where do you want to get to? Why are you doing this? Are you trying to replace your print revenue? Have you launched digital subscriptions, maybe meant to just make up for the decline in digital advertising? There's been this focus, as going back to Raju Narisetti, on subscriber volumes, but what does the fact that a site has 400,000 digital subscribers, what does that really tell you? It doesn't tell you how long they've been there. It doesn't tell you how much you're spending on constantly filling that funnel for the people who churned. It doesn't tell you how much revenue you make per subscribers, or either via the price you put or via advertising. So the vast majority of the publishers I've talked to, they say that they are now shifting their growth strategy from a focus that was on volumes and sales to a focus on ARPU and revenue, so annual revenue per user. And in a way, that is just the same thing as saying they're shifting their focus from sales to retention. Next. So one of the groups who are doing this is Schibsted in Scandinavia, and you can see on the slide here, they see that even though they've moved on to the revenue volumes, the revenue maximization, then volumes are still growing. So it's just that the revenue is currently growing faster, at a faster rate. And they have set a goal of generating 1 billion Norwegian kroner, so that's about 100 million euros in digital subscriber revenue by 2020. So that's a hard and fast goal for them. Of course, there are many aspects to consider when you think about ARPU. So price is one. Different publishers have definitely found different sweet spots. So it may be that a higher price point will give you lower sales, and it might even give you more churn, but sometimes that will still constitute a higher value in the long term. Publishers like Politiken in Denmark and Süddeutsche Zeitung in Germany, they see relatively low churn despite price points in the sort of 40 euro range. But then there are other cases like Dagens Nyheter in Stockholm, which is a big national newspaper, and they have two products. One is at about €9 a month, and then they have like a family version at €18. And they found that people churn much more when they come in on the higher price point. So they focused on increasing the volumes of sales for the lower €9 price point, even though they'll get lower revenue at the beginning, but they think in the long term it's going to be work well for them. And then, of course, with advertising, there's been traditionally this huge worry that if you put up a paywall, you're going to lose traffic and you're going to lose advertising revenue. But you have to look at the whole picture, because outside the paywall, you have flybys who most likely come in because of an article that they found in search or on social media. But behind the paywall, you have hopefully loyal customers who consume a lot more content per visit and hence more page views. So there was an example of the New York Times from 2016, so it's fairly recent. They made more money from their then 1.8 million subscribers than they made from all of their 122 million non-paying users. So just to compare, the ARPU for the non-subscriber was $1.70. The ARPU for the subscriber was $125, so huge difference. So don't focus too much on the traffic volumes. Next. Yeah, so basically, when it comes to looking at your growth strategy, we would probably recommend you shifting from volume and sales to retention and revenue, because it's going to form your basis and make it much more solid. And the price, you have to investigate the sweet spot. Mather, which is a consultancy firm from Atlanta, Georgia, they've done some research. And they found that long-term subscribers are much less affected by price increases than new subscribers. So maybe price elasticity, if that's an option in your market, perhaps you could use that to grow revenue without upsetting your volumes. And then advertising, where does it fit into all of this? Maybe should you do what Le Figaro is doing? They say, well, only 3% of our visits come from paying subscribers. So we are going to give them a no advertising experience because that is what they want, and it's not going to affect our revenue. So look at the advertising. Are you going to, is the fact that your subscribers consume more content and page views, maybe that will make up for the loss of your traffic that caused by your paywall.
And I think that's where I would just say at this point that we don't believe in a future without advertising. I think we just need to consider what is quality advertising. So the FT might have a full page kind of Gucci advert in the tablet version of the product. So how can you offer similar high quality within the subscriber experience? And so it's clearly not going to be little banner ads and pop-ups everywhere, but that's something that we still have to explore a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now we're going to move on to your product. So because it doesn't really matter how targeted and clever your marketing is, you will not have sustainable growth if your value proposition isn't clear and attractive to your prospective customers. So in other words, you need to develop products and services that speak to your audience. And I mean, journalism might be a key USP, but for very few news publishers, is journalism going to be enough? Everything you do needs to start with user experience. Find out what people like, what they want by asking them and by looking at their consumption data. And next. So there are many ways of adding value to content. So personalization, of course, is one. There are different schools of thought on this. I mean, you can certainly give users the choice to weight their newsfeed. For example, I want more sports than politics. Some of the publishers I've talked to find that people really don't want to bother choosing and they don't use it. So in this instance, perhaps it's better that you use your behavioral data to infer interests and surface content to them based on how they've consumed in the past. There are other options, of course, as well. You can offer newsletters, and if you do, you should probably have journalists write them and focus on interests that might work for good segments. Telegraph in the UK is an example where they are the only publisher in the UK with a sort of stated pro-Brexit stance, and they have a Brexit bulletin newsletter. They also have a rugby newsletter because they are the rugby destination in Britain. So you can do things like that. For traffic or weather or things like that. Next. So your value proposition isn't limited to news. Many publishers are sort of creating standalone products to reach audiences beyond who they would normally get in touch with, probably. This is Swedish Mittmedia. They have 2 verticals in sport, one for hockey and one for bandy, which is another winter sport. And so they can deliver comprehensive coverage to core fans who are paying for these products, but who most of them have no subscription of the actual news sites. And of course, the New York Times is another example. So right now, 15% of digital subscriptions for them come from the cooking and crosswords products. And they are actually growing. Those products are growing faster than the news product for the New York Times. You need to be sure that everyone in the organization know what you're doing and why for your customers. Like, why do they pick you over the competition? And local, it's probably easier for like local, when you have a defined market like local media or financial media. You know, if you have a good local value, that is a very clear value proposition. The news market, of course, it's only a small part of the digital content economy. So is there a way you can develop content that's beyond news and that can give you more growth? And also, the last point here is to keep iterating, keep improving. The job is never done. You have to keep stay ahead of the curve with your development of products and services, and always look to what your users want.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there, Cecilia, about personalization, and I think that's something that we're seeing everybody is working very hard on. And we're living in a time of infinite scroll with Instagram and Twitter and all the other feeds. And I think September is even non-scroll month as a kind of reaction to that. But what that means is it's really difficult to get people to read or to surface the articles that will be relevant to readers. And that's where you're going to have to be more sophisticated in personalization. And of course, that will be influenced a little bit by GDPR now, but that could in future be a report in itself, I guess.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on to the content then. So this is a basic point about content. Content is really key for retention, and everyone I talk to agree on this. Subscribers who convert on content and journalism are much more likely to be loyal than those who came in because they wanted some freebie or some other incentive from a marketing campaign. But as with everything, you have to look at the behavior patterns, because it might be that what converted somebody is not the type of content that then gets consumed once they are paying and can consume freely. Next. So there's a case in Sweden, this is Mittmedia again. They actually use an automated content service, which it takes data from the land registry, creates a short text for each house that is sold in all of their local markets. They have a deal with Google Street View, so they also have a picture of the house. And Sweden being Sweden, the names of the buyers are available. So that's also included in this short text. And they have found that those texts actually engage really well with the existing consumers. It's one of the top types of articles that are consumed by subscribers. So they wanted to increase the number of articles, and because they have automated creation, they could do this. So you see that along the x-axis is the types of articles, and along the y-axis are the thousands of articles. And so they increased it, and it means that they get more engagement. They used to do 2 summary articles per month about house sales per news site. Now they generate 480 articles a week, and all of that is potential revenue, and all of that is definitely engagement, and which is also then key to retention. And they have even sold some digital subscriptions on the back of this on this content. So in terms of takeaways with content, don't make assumptions. I mean, Svenska Dagbladet, they know that what converts is need-to-know material. So that's stuff that's going to help you understand the world, how you live your life. But once somebody is actually paying, they start consuming nice-to-know stuff, guides, arts, reviews, and they need to. They've appointed 2 editors now to make sure that they produce the right content for both those segments, so that the engagement keeps growing. Also, surface content to subscribers that they wouldn't perhaps otherwise discover, because if they consume more, generally speaking, that means it drives engagement, and that drives retention again.
No, this is interesting, Cecilia, because I mean, I think there's a few schools of thought on this, and I know at Ekstrabladet, the tabloid in Denmark, their argument was that subscribers are paying to get more of the same. They're paying because they want to see more of that content, and so that means they don't want longer articles, they don't want investigations, they want to just have more of the same. So but you're saying that the people we spoke to had a different feedback.
Yeah, slightly. I mean, I'm not sure that you can really talk about schools of thought, because I think the picture is more in the detail than that. But if you a publisher that has a wider type of content, a wider gamut of content, will have a more varied picture. With Ekstrabladet, maybe it is that it's a very specific type of stuff that you come for, and that is what you come to Ekstrabladet for, whether you pay or not. But I couldn't really comment on their case. Okay, so let's move on to the KPIs. So KPIs need to be set very differently in the subscription economy than they were when it was all about ad sales, right? So we started out with focusing on traffic and page views for the longest time, it feels like. And then people started launching digital subscriptions. So then the KPI became sales. But now with retention, it is just about one thing, and that is the engagement, hence the title of the report. So you use the engagement to build out a funnel of loyal users. They're not paying yet, but they are going to be. And because if you have them loyal in the funnel, they are much less likely to churn once they come in, because they have already got those behavior patterns. They're already consuming your content regularly, and are much more likely to stay with you once they start paying. So there's no industry benchmark for how to set KPIs for engagement. Again, this is all about testing what happens in your company. And also you should definitely borrow ideas from others. There are some different ones. So like in the Nordics, time spent is a big one that seems to indicate that you will retain if you spend a certain number of minutes per week, let's say. Recency, frequency, volume, which was originally developed by the FT, that's been adapted by a lot of publishers in one way or another. And then a few of the publishers I talked to have developed single scores. So these are made up of lots of different data points. And the beauty of a single score is that it's easy. The whole organization understands it's a single number. You can see if it goes up or down. Are we doing well? Are we going backwards? And one of these publishers is Welt, part of Axel Springer Group in Germany. And they started developing something they call the Welt Plus score. And that was all about filling the funnel. So that was made up from a number of metrics for both existing customers and new customers. And again, they could see, is it going up? Is it going down? How are we doing? Of course, then they found that 50% of those people who converted, they left in the first 3 months. After that, it leveled out to 1 to 2%, but they had a real big drop-off in the first 3 months. So now they've developed a new score. They call it the loyalty score, and that is all focused on retention. And that includes metrics in like 3 subgroups: subscriber score, a login score, and a user score. And that is what they use internally as well to communicate how the digital subscription business is doing. So again, there is no benchmark. You have to identify how engagement works for your subscribers, and that is how you build loyalty.
It does.
So we're going to go on. Sorry, go on.
No, I mean, I was just going to make a comment, because I think it does create a challenge for us, especially as an association, to kind of compare and benchmark. And I remember I think the FT, if you ask them with their metric based on recency, frequency, and volume, they'll say something like, the answer is 0.62. There's no way of working out how that was generated, and you can see you had 15.44 or something as one of the metrics from Velt. So this is really tricky. But I mean, one of the simplest ones is minutes per week. But even that, there are a number of different ways of calculating minutes per week. So we're probably a long way off from being able to say, hey, this is a good metric.
And maybe in a way, the key is to compare with yourself. Like, where are you heading, and how is that going for you? And also, I mean, obviously the models and that people are using, you can take inspiration from that in how you work out your own models. But yeah, it's very, very difficult to compare one publisher with another one, for sure. Okay, so we come now to to churn, because we talked a lot about retention mainly so far. But of course, you want to be able to predict and prevent and act on actual churn. So again, the first problem is, how do you measure it? And that could be a number of things. You could look at the percentage of your total subscriber base that leaves each month or each week. For Schibsted, active subscribers is like a key KPI. So what they look at is how many churn among daily active subscribers, because that's the group they really focus on. And then, of course, you'll get another picture if you look at those who churn when they go from a trial into a fully paid product. Some people look at the other way around. They're actually trying to pinpoint where the subscribers fall off, and then figure out how they're going to act in those situations. So these are all ways of measuring churn. And then, of course, the next step is to predict it. And we have found that there are some more or less universal churn predictors among publishers. So inactivity, again, which is obviously the opposite of engagement in a way. Inactivity is a churn predictor. If you consume quite a low number of premium articles by unit of time, that could be an indicator. If you have low frequency in your visits to the site, if you have low app usage, so high app usage is clearly an indicator of loyalty for many. And again, how has this customer converted? If it was to get those free cinema tickets, they're more likely to churn than if they came in on the journalism. And then also we had a couple of people saying that when they use telemarketing to sell digital subscriptions, that is a churn predictor. So those people probably they don't have the digital behavior to actually consume, even though they were convinced by the sales arguments on the phone call. And then once you've developed your churn prediction model, you need to work out how to act on that data, and that is probably the toughest thing of all. So this is kind of a side thing, but I think in a way also core to what we're talking about. So there's been this tendency in our industry to make it super complicated to cancel a digital subscription. Like somehow publishers thought it was a good idea to trap customers in some cases. I mean, I vowed to never go back this is maybe 2 years ago, to never go back to the New York Times because they forced me to call the US in order to cancel my subscription, which is ridiculous. But we have to keep in mind that digital consumers, their benchmarks for customer service is Netflix and Spotify and Amazon and people like this. So if you compete in this market, you need to enable this come and go behavior and just trust that your content and services are good enough. I mean, some publishers actually see direct benefits from allowing this type of behavior. So Media, they are managing to actually convert 19-year-olds to paying subscribers, and they've never had customers in that segment before. And at Le Figaro, they allow however many trials you want, and after about 4 trials, they see that people start to just stay long term. So by allowing the come and go behavior, they are actually gaining new subscribers.
And that's what we were talking about earlier, because even the New York Times is now changing that approach, partly because of automation, which I don't know may happen in Europe as well, but that was this new California law that if you signed up online, then you should be able to cancel online as well. So that could just hit us anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the churn takeaways, then learn to predict it, which is not very difficult, and then work out how to respond to people in the danger zone. Next slide, Nick. And of course, the onboarding process is key. You've got to get new subscribers hooked, or you're going to lose them after the trial. And then also fix the basics. So preempt credit card expirations, for example. For the Boston Globe, they told us that working through the whole credit card expiration issue has had the single biggest impact on retention for their company. And that was like a really boring fix, but it made a huge difference.
And it's, of course, different for every country, as we know, because I think in the UK, that's also a huge thing. I've heard some stories about Sky, and yeah, it was an incredible result for them to reduce that kind of natural churn from credit cards. But of course, if you're in Austria or somewhere where not many people subscribe with credit card, then it's direct debit, then you've got a different sort of challenge.
Hello?
You're back online, I think.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. So we're moving on to the holistic organization then. My final point. So maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years ago, the premium business in a publishing house might be run from a small department, sort of set aside as a little, innovation corner. Of course, as we've seen now with this whole process, it's all about giving a customer a holistic experience. And in order to do that, you have to have a holistic approach in the organization. And there are some different models. So Aftonbladet in Stockholm, for example, they've put in place a premium top management group with people from marketing, newsroom, from product, and all the different departments. And they actually have remit to act. They don't have to go and ask the top management group to move things forward. More common is that you have a bridge function between departments, and a lot of publishers are putting in a customer experience function in the marketing department, so that somebody who's focused on what happens to the customer once they get into the system. In Politiken in Denmark, they've set up a retention team in marketing. So if a customer calls to cancel, they get passed on to this retention focused team rather than just a general customer service. And then in terms of content, there seems to be 2 schools of thought. So either you develop your content in a separate, you could have a content development team, and that's where you do all the analysis and work out where you're going to go with the content and storytelling. Or some publishers look at it as if, all content is born equal, and only after planning and creations should editors decide on what's going to be premium. That is something you have to decide on. And while many publishers now have performance dashboards in the newsroom, some still believe that journalists really should be shielded from that kind of stuff. So these are all kind of philosophical questions that depends on your culture, and you have to decide how you're going to approach all of that. But in all of it, it's of course, again, key to put the customer in the center of the process. And at Le Figaro in France, they've appointed a UX director, and she sits in some sort of satellite position. So she's not with the newsroom or in marketing. She is actually the voice of the customer, and she reports to the deputy CEO. And this is their dashboard, so everyone in the company can look at that. And every month they publish usage data, key metrics, satisfaction, and feedback for all their products, you know, and including the conversion funnel, but also newsletters and apps and the mobile website and whatever it may be. So in terms of organization takeaways, make sure everyone in your organization is on board with the objectives and that there is a good bridge between all departments. Involve the newsroom. So you might want to consider setting KPIs for your reporters. Most people I've talked to do, but not everybody. You could appoint premium ambassadors in the newsroom who can advise colleagues and sort of build trust between editorial and business, because of course there's been this great big wall between those departments until quite recently. It's important to train journalists, and you do that based on engagement insights and the work that, if you have a content development team, the work that they do to make journalists understand and develop their own storytelling. Communicate regularly with the whole organization about how important this is. And then, unfortunately, there's the main challenge, it's like an elephant in the room, and it's technology. And we'll come back to this, but it's hard to have a holistic approach if systems don't talk to each other, which seems to be a problem even for the most advanced publishers that I've met.
Absolutely, and I think we're planning to do a report on exactly that topic next year to go a little bit deeper. You know, how does your marketing automation and CRM link back with your entitlements and your CMS system and your subscription management systems, et cetera, et cetera. So, and do you link your print with your digital? I think we need to spend a bit of time as well digging into how all of that works and all of the suppliers that we work with, where they fit into the picture. So. But yeah, yes. Thanks very much, Cecilia. That's a really superb summary of the report. Of course, there is even more in the actual report itself, which you can get on the website. And if you didn't get the link at the beginning, just go to WAN-IFRA.org and then Insights. One final question from me before I come to, we have a couple of questions from the audience, would be like just how, after doing all these interviews and discussions and emails, I mean, and after many years of working on this, I mean, how optimistic are you that we can kind of make this transition into a paid digital content world?
Well, I'm really quite optimistic, I have to say. I think I believe publishers' relationship with their customers, this is what the industry is built on, and we have those. And we have scope to create new ones, but I mean, the fundament is there to build on. We just need to get clever about how we understand our data and how we develop our products, I think. It's a cultural thing as well. You know, you need your organization to be behind you. And there's been many years of sort of with such a focus on advertising. And as you say, advertising is always going to be there. But I think this is going to be key to our survival. And I'm very positive after talking to all these people.
Yeah, that's good to hear. So, okay, so first we have one question was from the audience here was, you know, how effective in terms of anti-churn or for retention is it if having different subscription models? So I guess you mean, so by offering a choice of subscription models, does that help keep people? Do you know,
that was not something we really covered. I think that, I mean, obviously the Dagens Nyheter example was there, where they found that the lower price point actually was better for retention. But I have to say, some other publishers said the opposite. And said, like Süddeutsche Zeitung, who have a high price, but they also have a lot of different options to choose from. And I couldn't honestly tell you exactly how that's linked to retention then. If you talk about just the fact that there is choice, is that going to be help with retention. My gut feeling is that if there's too much choice, it just confuses people. You want to have pretty clear products, clear value propositions. Don't make it too muddled for users. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I would just add, from what I've heard, it also depends on what kind of offering you have. So if you're a financial publisher and you have a whole bunch of different kind of verticals or products, then there's some optimum number for how many times someone can change between the package before they churn. I think it was something like 7 or 8 I heard in some data, but that's a very specific use case. I think it's not common among our publishers. We had a classic question here, another question which was, can we generalize, what's a good churn rate? I mean, there's someone saying that they heard from a number of publishers when they went on a recent study tour that it was around 7% was a, inverted commas, good number.
Well, 7% of what? On what? This is the question always. On the total subscriber base over 12 months, or like that's a number. I mean, if it's on the total subscriber base, maybe over a 12-month period, yes, perhaps if you're under 10%, you could say that's good. But I mean, that's as far as I'm prepared to go, because it's really hard to generalize. And of course, different publishers are going to tell you different things. So, and maybe quite happy with different numbers based on where they used to be, or sorry.
That's fair enough. I think I'd have the same answer, I think. But normally you can work out, sometimes if someone has a 12% monthly churn, you're kind of talking about more than 100% churning over the year. So you have to kind of work out what that means in reality. But mostly, it's probably the number you want to talk about is people who've been with you longer than 100 days as a starting point. But yeah.
I mean, my advice would be the next time somebody gives you a number like that, you ask them to specify what it is they're talking about. Because if it's a month, if it's 100 days, or if it's a year, that's a big difference, of course.
Absolutely. So here's another question. Were there any lessons out of your research that really apply for regional publishers where their value proposition is local news?
Well, I think regional as opposed to local, I would say that's still sort of some form of local. And I think your value proposition is maybe an easier one, a clearer one, because you have that defined market. Which and also if you're a group and you can have some central resources to develop your digital subscription business in terms of content and stuff, and then just use all the lessons across the group, then that's certainly of value. But I would say if you're a local group, if a local publisher, you certainly have an advantage in that your local content is going to be unique, and you can provide services locally that nobody else is doing. I mean, our media in Norway, for example, they've started streaming local low division sports, and that is like, it really, with certain groups, it really drives engagement for them. I mean, of course, there's a cost to that, but using your imagination and just, I mean, I think in Scandinavia, sports streaming seems to be a big area now for local newspapers.
And I think because you've also got MIT Media, and you talked about that a bit in your presentation, and they have quite an interesting map, for example, activity map on how where the subscribers have been active. So are you actually serving them with content that is meaningful for them? And I think that was quite a good innovation. And yes. Maybe what we didn't do perhaps this time around is talk to really small local publishers. So these are all groups where they can centralize a lot of the data gathering. And I think that's still something that we want to dig more into and to find really good examples. Because again, you have that tech problem. Can you get hold of the same tech? Can you get the same developers? Can you get the same data scientists? Some of the bigger groups.
I mean, I think unfortunately there is no way around the fact that you have to understand your own data. you have to get your data in order, and you have to understand it, because otherwise you're kind of flying blind. And yeah, that's a tough lesson for small publishers who don't have a lot of resources. But
okay, so we've maybe got time for 2 more questions. I think they're both coming from Latin America. So we've got one question: is what kind of content is relevant for subscribers? Which sounds like a chapter of the report.
Well, again, there is no one answer to that, because it really depends who is your audience, what is your brand as a publisher. I mean, why do they come to you in the first place, and how can you develop on that brand? So it's very hard to say. I mean, we've had a lot of I have a lot of the sort of more general national publishers talk about this difference between need to know and nice to know, and not just the people interviewed in this report, but other publishers that we've come across as well. So converting would be, and I mean, this is probably something that a lot of people will consume as well, but it's very relevant to subscribers. Is all the stuff that you really need to know to run your life. It could be about personal health or things like that, or it could be about politics in your area, or key issues that that you need to kind of function in society. But that's really kind of the only overall lesson I could really see. It really depends on where you are, what your news brand is, and who your audience is, unfortunately. I can't help more than that.
No, that's the whole chapter. It's page 24 in the report, if you got it. So there was another one, which is, do you have any examples from Latin American media of people that have had success with paywalls? I mean, I might just answer that one first from my perspective. I mean, I actually was there in Brazil with Cecilia back in, I think, 2013 or 2014.
14, yeah.
And there it was quite interesting, because there was a high kind of willingness to pay, because there was some of the, I think UOL was the kind of AOL equivalent in Brazil, and was set up by a publisher. So there was this kind of acceptance of payments for news through your internet provider. So that meant that it was quite interesting to go and visit Folha de Sao Paulo. But when I last spoke to them, it hadn't been such a strong development. But I would really look at RBS, which is a local group in Brazil, who presented at our Congress in June, and they had a real tough challenge to deal with. They had to close some of the titles, but what they've done on digital is really take a lot of the lessons from around the world and a lot of the things that Cecilia is talking about and applied them. So I would definitely look at some of the RBS titles, and we can maybe put you in contact. So do you want one last question, Cecilia?
Go on then.
So here it is. Is it a myth that the content that converts subscribers also retains them? Which we've kind of touched.
I think myth is a strong word. Yeah, that myth is a strong word. But again, it's this thing. Don't assume that that's the case. That's what I would say. It could be, but it could also be that once they are paying, they don't pick and choose as much. They kind of browse around and find other stuff that they really want to engage with. And you also, as a publisher, you have the opportunity to surface content that you think, based on their previous consumption patterns, that they might be interested in. But yeah, the main lesson is, don't assume that the two are the same. Look at what your actually paying subscribers are consuming, because it might be quite different than what got them there in the first place.
Well, I think that's a great place to stop. So the general message there: don't make assumptions, but if you are going to make assumptions, then first of all read Cecilia's report. Brilliant ending. So thanks very much, Cecilia. That was really good. Thanks to everybody that's dialed in to join us. We're going to make the recording available very shortly on YouTube, and send around a link to everybody that signed up for the webinar. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.